They said I was family until I couldn't pay. Then they kicked me out like a stranger. I was living in my car eating stale crackers from a gas station when I drove past my own house and saw strangers partying in my living room. The woman I'd supported for 12 years, my dead husband's sister, who called me family, was charging them $800 a month to live in the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 23 years. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what I found when I started digging into her lies. This woman had been secretly collecting over $5,000 a month from welfare fraud, hidden jobs, and her kids' paychecks, while watching me work myself into 3 jobs and a heart condition trying to support our family. She'd been planning to steal my house since before my husband even died, and she'd turned my own kids, the children I'd raised and loved for over a decade, against me with lies so vicious I didn't even recognize them anymore. But honey, here's what Carmen didn't know about me. I might be 58 years old and temporarily homeless, but I didn't build a successful business and survive poverty by letting people walk all over me. When I finally uncovered the truth about her criminal empire, I didn't just get my house back. I sent her to prison and exposed a fraud scheme that had been destroying families across our entire state. You're about to hear how a grandmother living in her car brought down a professional con artist who thought she'd picked the perfect victim. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of how this nightmare unfolded and how I got my revenge. 23 years ago, I thought I was getting the family I'd always dreamed of. I was 35, newly married to the love of my life, Roberto, and finally feeling like I belonged somewhere. Roberto's family welcomed me with open arms, or so I thought. His sister Carmen was especially warm, always calling me Hermana and talking about how wonderful it was to finally have a sister. You see, Roberto and I had been trying to have children for years with no luck. The doctors said it probably wasn't going to happen naturally, and fertility treatments were expensive and not guaranteed. Meanwhile, Carmen was struggling as a single mother with 3 young kids. Miguel was 8, Sophia was 6, and little Elena was just 4. Their father had disappeared when Elena was born, leaving Carmen with nothing but bills and heartbreak. When Carmen lost her job at the insurance office and couldn't make rent anymore, Roberto and I didn't even hesitate. Family helps family, he said, and I agreed completely. We invited them to move in with us temporarily while Carmen got back on her feet. Linda, you're an angel, Carmen told me, tears streaming down her face as we helped her pack up her little apartment. I don't know what we would have done without you and Roberto. You're not just my sister-in-law. You're my sister, my family, my lifeline. I felt so needed, so important, so loved. Here were 3 beautiful children who needed a stable home and a woman who needed support. Roberto and I had this big house with 4 bedrooms, and honestly, having the kids around filled a hole in my heart I didn't even know was there. It's just temporary, Carmen kept saying. Just until I find a new job and save up for a deposit on a place. But honey, temporary has a way of becoming permanent when nobody's really trying to change the situation. The first few months were actually wonderful. The kids brought so much joy and energy to our house. Miguel was this sweet, serious boy who loved helping Roberto with yard work. Sophia was artistic and would spend hours drawing pictures for me that I hung all over the refrigerator. And Elena, that little angel, used to crawl into my lap every evening and fall asleep while I read to her. But I should have been paying attention to Carmen's behavior from the very beginning. Even in those early days, there were signs that something wasn't right. She'd disappear for hours at a time without explanation, claiming she was looking for work, but she'd come back with her nails freshly done or carrying shopping bags from stores we couldn't afford. Where did you get the money for new clothes? I asked one day when she came home with bags from the mall. Oh, these old things, she'd say, waving dismissively. I found them at the thrift store for practically nothing. But I knew designer labels when I saw them, and those weren't thrift store finds. Carmen seemed genuinely grateful and was actively looking for work, or so she claimed. She'd show me job applications, talk about interviews, and always assured me she was doing everything possible to get back on her feet. Meanwhile, I was falling in love with being the mother figure these kids had been missing. But gradually, things started to shift. Carmen's job search became less urgent. She'd sleep in later, spend more time watching television, and always had an excuse for why this opportunity didn't work out, or that interview didn't lead anywhere. These kids need stability right now, she'd say when I gently ask about her employment search. Maybe it's better if I wait until they're more settled before I disrupt everything again. And I understood that logic, I really did. These children had been through so much upheaval already. If Roberto and I could provide that stability while Carmen took her time finding the right opportunity, wasn't that the loving thing to do? But providing stability turned out to be more expensive than I'd anticipated. 3 growing children meant higher grocery bills, utility costs that doubled, and constant needs for clothes, school supplies, activities, and medical expenses. Roberto and I were both working. I was a bookkeeper at a small manufacturing company, and he managed a restaurant. But our income was comfortable for 2 people, not 6. Don't worry about it, I told Carmen when she'd apologize about not being able to contribute financially. That's what family is for. The kids come first. And I meant it, sweetheart. I truly believed that love and family meant sacrifice, and I was happy to make those sacrifices. When Miguel needed a new bike, I bought it. When Sophia wanted to take art classes, I paid for them. When Elena needed special tutoring to catch up in reading, I found the best tutor in town and wrote the checks. Carmen would always hug me tight and say, "Linda, you're saving our lives. I'm so blessed to have you as a sister. I promise I'll pay you back for everything when I get back on my feet." But here's what I didn't realize at the time. Carmen was already on her feet. She just didn't want me to know it. 1 year turned into 2, then 3, then 5. The kids were growing up in our house, calling it home, and I was calling them my children in my heart. Roberto and I had given up on the idea of having biological children and had poured all our parental love into Miguel, Sophia, and Elena. But then I started noticing things that made my stomach turn. I'd come home from my second job on weekends to find Carmen lounging by our pool, perfectly manicured nails gleaming in the sun, while I was working myself to the bone. She'd gotten her hair and nails done, expensive salon work that I knew cost at least $200, while claiming she had no money for groceries. "Oh, this," she'd say when I'd ask about her fresh highlights. "My friend Maria did it for free. She's practicing for her cosmetology license." But I'd seen Maria's work posted on social media with price tags attached. Nothing was free. Then I discovered something that made me physically sick. While going through papers to organize our taxes, I found receipts Carmen had thrown away. Designer purses, expensive shoes, restaurant meals at places Roberto and I couldn't afford to eat. "Carmen," I confronted her one evening, "where did you get the money for a $400 Michael Kors bag?" Her face went pale for just a second before she recovered. "Linda, that bag is fake. I bought it from a street vendor for $20. Why are you interrogating me like I'm some kind of criminal?" But I'd felt that bag. I knew real leather when I touched it. That's when I realized Carmen wasn't just lazy. She was actively lying to me about money while I was killing myself, working 3 jobs to support her family. Roberto picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, working 6 days a week instead of 5. I took on freelance bookkeeping clients on weekends to bring in additional income. We stopped going out to dinner, stopped taking vacations, stopped buying anything for ourselves that wasn't absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, Carmen seemed to have settled into a comfortable routine of spending money she claimed not to have while doing absolutely no work. She'd sleep until 10 a.m. while I was getting the kids ready for school and rushing off to my job. She'd spend afternoons watching telenovelas and online shopping while I was working to pay for everything. But here's the part that still makes me furious. She was getting that money by stealing from the kids' piggy banks, selling gifts people had given them, and even pawning some of my jewelry when she thought I wouldn't notice. I was working myself to death to provide for children whose own mother was stealing from them to fund her shopping addiction. But the real wake up call came when I found something that made me question everything I thought I knew about Carmen's financial situation. About 6 years into this arrangement, I was helping Miguel with a school project that required him to research family finances. Carmen had always claimed to have no credit cards because of her bad financial situation. But while looking through some mail that had been left on the kitchen counter, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Credit card statements addressed to Carmen, not just one, but four different cards from different companies. When I looked more closely, and yes, I know I shouldn't have, but something felt wrong, I saw that these weren't maxed out cards from someone struggling financially. These were premium cards with high limits, and the statements showed regular payments being made. But more shocking were the purchase records. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, spa treatments, even a weekend trip to Las Vegas that Carmen had claimed was a work retreat for a job she supposedly didn't have. The monthly payments on these cards totaled over $800, more than Roberto and I spent on groceries for all six of us. Carmen, I said that evening, my hands shaking as I held the statements, can you explain these credit card bills? She looked at the papers in my hands, and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and then something I'd never seen before: calculation. Linda, why are you going through my mail? She asked, her voice cold. It was sitting on the counter. Carmen, where is this money coming from? You've told us for years that you have no income, no savings, no way to contribute to household expenses. That's none of your business, she said flatly. My personal finances are private. Your personal finances? I could feel my voice rising. Carmen, I've been supporting you and your children for 6 years. I've emptied my savings, taken on debt, worked myself to exhaustion because you said you couldn't contribute anything. And now I find out you've been spending hundreds of dollars a month on luxury items. You chose to support us, Carmen said, and her voice was completely different now, harder, more calculated. No one forced you to do anything. If you want to stop, you can stop anytime. But what about the kids? What about their stability? Carmen smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. The kids will be fine, Linda. We'll figure something out. That's when I realized that Carmen had never been the grateful, struggling single mother I thought she was. She was something else entirely, something much more dangerous. The wake-up call should have come when Miguel graduated from high school. This sweet boy I'd helped raise for 10 years had grown into a wonderful young man, and I was so proud of him. He'd been accepted to the state university with a partial academic scholarship, but there were still significant costs for housing, meals, books, and other expenses. We'll figure it out, I told him when he worried about the money. Education is the most important investment we can make. We'll find a way. What I didn't tell him was that Roberto and I had already been dipping into our retirement savings to cover household expenses. What I didn't tell him was that we'd refinanced our house twice to manage the costs of raising 3 children on our two modest incomes. When Carmen asked if we could help with Miguel's college expenses, I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said. He's family. This is what we do for family. But that night, Roberto and I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills, and the reality was devastating. We'd been living beyond our means for so long that we barely had any savings left. Our credit cards were maxed out. Our retirement accounts were nearly empty. Linda, Roberto said gently, we can't keep this up. We're destroying our own financial future. But what about the kids? I asked, feeling panicked at the thought of letting them down. We can't just abandon them now. Miguel is about to start college. Sophia is a sophomore in high school. Elena still needs us. I'm not saying we abandon them, Roberto said. I'm saying Carmen needs to step up and take responsibility. It's been 8 years, Linda. 8 years of us supporting her and her children while she's contributed almost nothing. But every time we tried to have that conversation with Carmen, she'd break down crying and remind us how much the kids needed stability, how grateful she was, how she was still looking for the right opportunity. And I'd look at those three beautiful young people I'd helped raise, and I couldn't bear the thought of disrupting their lives. So we took out another loan against the house to pay for Miguel's first year of college. But here's what I found out later that made me sick to my stomach. Miguel's college expenses had been covered by financial aid the entire time. Carmen had applied for and received full funding for his education based on her claimed poverty status, but she'd never told me. She'd let me drain my retirement savings and mortgage my house to pay for college costs that were already covered. The financial pressure was getting so intense that Roberto and I were fighting about money constantly. We'd never had those kinds of arguments before, but the stress of carrying 6 people on two modest incomes was tearing us apart. That's when Carmen came to me with what seemed like a solution, but I now realize was the beginning of her master plan. Linda, she said one evening after the kids had gone to bed, I've been thinking about our situation, and I have an idea that might help everyone. She explained that she'd been talking to a financial advisor who suggested that since Roberto and I were struggling with the mortgage and expenses, maybe it would make sense to put the house in my name only. But here's what I didn't know at the time. Carmen had been meeting with this financial advisor for months, and he wasn't advising her about helping us. He was helping her figure out how to eventually take control of the house. Plus, Carmen added, with what I now recognize as calculated manipulation, if something ever happened to Roberto, God forbid, you'd be protected. The house would be completely yours, and you wouldn't have to worry about any legal complications with his family. She'd actually said, when something happens to Roberto, not if. At the time, I thought it was just her poor English. Now, I wonder if she knew something about Roberto's health that I didn't. The scariest part? When we went to the lawyer to transfer the deed, Carmen insisted on coming with us for moral support. But I caught her taking pictures of all the legal documents with her phone. Just for our records, she said when I asked about it, in case we ever need copies. Our records. Even then, she was positioning herself as a co-owner of property she'd never paid a dime toward. I had no idea I was signing the paperwork that would eventually make it possible for her to steal my house. But the most chilling thing happened as we were leaving the lawyer's office. Carmen put her arm around me and said, Linda, you're so smart to plan ahead like this. You never know what life is going to throw at you. The way she said it sent shivers down my spine, though I couldn't understand why at the time. Roberto had his heart attack on a Tuesday morning. One minute he was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, and the next minute he was on the kitchen floor, gasping for breath and clutching his chest. The ambulance came quickly, but by the time we got to the hospital, it was too late. My Roberto, my partner, my best friend for 23 years, was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to tell him how much I loved him one more time. I was devastated, completely shattered. Roberto had been my anchor, my strength, my everything. The kids were heartbroken too. He'd been the only father figure they'd really known. Carmen seemed genuinely grief-stricken, crying and hugging me and telling me we'd get through this together as a family. But even in my grief, I started noticing things about Carmen's behavior that seemed strange. While I was barely able to function, unable to eat or sleep, Carmen seemed to recover from her grief remarkably quickly. Within a week of Roberto's death, she was on the phone constantly, having whispered conversations that she'd stop when I walked into the room. Just handling some arrangements, she'd say, when I'd ask who she was talking to. Family stuff. But what family? Roberto's family lived in another state, and they'd already been informed about his death. The funeral was beautiful. Roberto's co-workers from the restaurant, our neighbors, friends from church, everyone came to pay their respects and offer support. I felt surrounded by love and was grateful for my family during the darkest time of my life. But love doesn't pay the bills, and Roberto's death meant we'd lost half our household income overnight. His restaurant job had basic life insurance, but it was only enough to cover the funeral expenses and a few months of basic living costs. Don't worry about anything right now, Carmen told me during those first terrible weeks. Just focus on grieving and healing. We're family. We'll figure out the money stuff together. I believed her, honey. I genuinely believed that the woman I'd supported for nearly a decade, the children I'd helped raise, the family I'd sacrificed everything for, I believed they'd stand by me during my darkest hour. I was so naive. About 4 months after Roberto's death, when I was barely keeping my head above water financially, I discovered something that changed everything. I was at the grocery store, exhausted from working a double shift, when I saw something that made my blood freeze. Carmen was there in the parking lot, getting out of a car I'd never seen before. But she wasn't alone. She was wearing a uniform, a blue polo shirt with a cleaning company logo, and she was laughing with two other women in identical uniforms. I ducked behind another car and watched as they said goodbye. Carmen got into her own car and drove off, completely unaware that I'd seen her. A cleaning company uniform. Carmen had a job, had probably had one for months. My hands were shaking as I called the number on the side of the van they'd gotten out of. Hi, I said when someone answered. I think one of your employees dropped something in the grocery store parking lot. A woman with dark hair, about 5 feet 6 inches? Carmen Ruiz. Oh, yes, Carmen's one of our best workers, the woman said cheerfully. She's been with us for about 8 months now. Very reliable, always on time. 8 months. Carmen had been employed for 8 months while letting me work myself to death, believing she couldn't find work. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. When I pressed for more information, pretending to be a potential client interested in hiring their service, the woman mentioned that Carmen was one of their premium specialists who worked with wealthy clients and made excellent money. She probably clears about $800 a week, the woman said proudly. Cash, of course, since most of our clients prefer to pay that way. $800 a week. Carmen had been making over $3,000 a month while watching me work 3 jobs and struggle to pay our bills. When I confronted her that evening, her reaction was even more shocking than the discovery itself. How dare you spy on me? She screamed. How dare you call my employer? Carmen, I've been killing myself working 3 jobs because you said you couldn't find work. I was going to tell you, she said, but her voice was defensive, not apologetic. But this job barely pays anything, and I needed to make sure it was going to work out before I got your hopes up. $800 a week barely pays anything. Carmen's face went pale. She hadn't expected me to know the specific amount. That's none of your business, Linda. What I make at my job is my money, for my expenses. Her money, her expenses. after 8 months of letting me believe she was unemployed while I worked myself into exhaustion. What expenses, Carmen? I pay for everything: the mortgage, utilities, groceries, the kids' clothes, their school supplies, their activities. I have personal expenses you don't know about, she said coldly. Just because you've chosen to support my children doesn't mean I owe you every penny I make. That's when I realized the horrible truth. Carmen had never planned to contribute to household expenses, even when she was working. She saw my support as permanent, and any money she made was hers to spend on whatever she wanted while I continued to pay for everything else. But here's what really broke my heart. When I checked the kids' college fund accounts the next day, I discovered that Carmen had been withdrawing money from Miguel's college savings, money I'd been putting away for years, to fund her personal expenses. She'd been stealing from her own son's future while I was working myself to death to pay for his present. The final straw came 8 months after Roberto's death. I'd been working my regular job, taking on every freelance client I could find. And yes, I'd even taken that overnight stocking job 3 nights a week. I was averaging about 4 hours of sleep a night and was so exhausted I could barely function. But even with all that work, I still couldn't keep up with the bills. The house was going into foreclosure. The utilities had been shut off twice. My car had been repossessed. I was failing at everything, and I felt like I was losing my mind. That's when I made the desperate decision to approach Carmen about selling the house. Carmen, I said one evening when we were sitting in the dark because the electricity had been turned off again, I think we need to seriously consider selling the house. Selling the house? Carmen looked genuinely shocked. Linda, this is our home. The kids grew up here. You can't just sell our home. I can't afford it anymore, I said, starting to cry from exhaustion and stress. Even working 3 jobs, I can't make the payments. We're going to lose it to foreclosure if we don't do something. But where would we live? Carmen asked. We could find a smaller place, maybe an apartment, split the rent. You could get a job to help with expenses. We could make it work if we both contributed. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. Linda, this house is in your name. These are your debts. I don't think it's fair to expect me and my children to suffer because you can't manage your finances properly. Your finances. After 12 years of me paying for everything, suddenly they were my debts, my problems, my failures. Carmen, I said slowly, I've been supporting you and your children for 12 years. I've paid for everything: food, clothes, school supplies, medical bills, Miguel's college tuition. I emptied my retirement savings. I've worked myself to exhaustion trying to keep this family together. How can you say this is just my problem? That was your choice, Linda, Carmen said coolly. No one forced you to do any of that. You offered to help, and we appreciated it, but that doesn't mean we owe you anything. I stared at her in shock. This was the woman who'd called me her sister, her angel, her lifeline. This was the woman who'd cried in my arms and promised to pay me back someday. This was the woman whose children I'd raised as my own. Besides, Carmen continued, Roberto is gone now. Things are different. Maybe it's time for all of us to make some changes. That night, I lay awake in the darkness, finally understanding what was happening. Carmen had never seen me as family. She'd seen me as a resource, a convenient source of financial support that she'd milked for over a decade. And now that I couldn't provide that support anymore, I was becoming disposable. But what I didn't know was that Carmen had already been planning my disposal for months. 2 weeks later, I came home from my bookkeeping job to find the locks had been changed on the house that was in my name, that I'd been paying the mortgage on for 23 years. My belongings, what Carmen had decided I was allowed to keep, were sitting in garbage bags on the front lawn. My neighbors were staring from their windows, watching this humiliating spectacle of a woman being thrown out of her own home. I sat in my beat up replacement car, staring at those garbage bags, trying to process what was happening. Carmen appeared at the front door, not even bothering to come outside. Carmen, I called out, getting out of my car. What is this? Why are the locks changed? Linda, she called back from the safety of the doorway. We need to talk, but not here. The neighbors don't need to see this. See what? You throwing me out of my own house? Your house? Carmen's voice got louder. The house you can't afford? The house that's going into foreclosure because you can't manage your money? We can't keep living in uncertainty, wondering if we're going to be homeless because of your financial problems. I walked closer to the door, but she stepped back inside, keeping the screen door between us. Carmen, please, can we just talk about this? We can figure something out. I'm family. And that's when she said the words that broke my heart completely. Linda, you're not family. You were Roberto's wife, but Roberto is dead. You've been a friend to me and my children, and we appreciate everything you've done. But we have to think about our own future now. But the house is in my name, I said weakly. The house you can't afford and are about to lose anyway. We talked to a lawyer, Linda. Since you can't make the payments, and since we've been living here for so long and taking care of the property, we have rights. We're not going to let you drag us down with your financial mess. I was so shocked I couldn't even speak. A lawyer? They'd gone to a lawyer without telling me? The kids need stability, Carmen continued. They've suffered enough upheaval in their lives. We're going to stay here and figure out our own solution. You need to figure out yours. What about Sophia and Elena? I asked, thinking about the two girls I'd helped raise. Can I at least say goodbye? They're not here right now, Carmen said. And honestly, Linda, I think it's better if we make a clean break. This situation has been hard on everyone. She closed the door. I heard the deadbolt turn. I stood there on the porch of the house I'd called home for 23 years, staring at the door that had just been slammed in my face, and realized I was completely alone in the world. For the first 3 nights, I slept in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. I had about $200 in cash, 3 garbage bags of belongings, and no idea what to do next. But the worst part wasn't the physical discomfort or the humiliation. It was what I discovered when I finally worked up the courage to drive by the house on my 4th day of homelessness. There were cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. Through the windows, I could see people I'd never met sitting in my living room, laughing and drinking beer. Carmen was hosting a party in the house I'd been paying for, celebrating my absence like it was some kind of victory. That's when I saw something that made me want to vomit. A for rent sign in the front yard. Carmen wasn't just living in my house. She was renting out rooms to strangers to make money off the property I'd been paying for. I called the number on the sign, disguising my voice. Hi, I'm interested in the room for rent, I said. Oh, great. Carmen's voice was cheerful and excited. It's a beautiful house, very well maintained. The rent is $800 a month, utilities included. When would you like to see it? $800 a month. Carmen was charging people almost half of what my mortgage payment had been, and she was probably renting out multiple rooms. Who's the landlord? I asked. I am, Carmen said proudly. I've owned this house for several years. It's a great neighborhood, very safe and quiet. She was telling people she owned my house, the house she'd never made a single payment on. During the day, I'd go to my bookkeeping job and pretend everything was normal. I'd use the bathroom at work to wash up and change clothes. I'd eat whatever free snacks were available in the break room and tell my coworkers I was cutting back on expenses. But the real torture was calling Miguel, Sophia, and Elena and getting nothing but voicemail. Carmen had clearly poisoned them against me completely, probably telling them I'd abandoned them or had some kind of mental breakdown. Finally, Sophia answered her phone. Linda? She said, and her voice was cold and distant. Sophia, sweetheart, I've been trying to reach you for days. Mom told us what happened, she said. Linda, I'm really sorry you're having problems, but we can't get involved in adult drama. Adult drama? Sophia, I raised you for 12 years. I helped pay for your car, your clothes, your school expenses. And we appreciate that, Sophia said, in a tone that suggested she didn't appreciate it at all. But that was your choice. Nobody forced you to spend money you couldn't afford. The words were almost identical to what Carmen had said to me. I realized she'd coached all the kids on exactly what to say if I tried to contact them. Sophia, please, can we just talk? Can I explain what really happened? Linda, I think it's better if we don't talk for a while. This whole situation is really stressful for everyone, and we need space to figure things out. Then she hung up on me. I sat in my car outside that Walmart, staring at my phone, and realized that Carmen hadn't just stolen my house. She'd stolen my children, too. After a week of sleeping in my car, I used some of my precious remaining cash to consult with a lawyer about my rights to the house. Surely, I thought, there had to be some legal recourse. The house was in my name. I'd been paying the mortgage for over 2 decades. But what the lawyer told me was devastating. Mrs. Martinez, he said after reviewing the documents I'd brought, this is a very complicated situation. Yes, the house is in your name, but your sister-in-law and her children have been living there for 12 years. They could potentially claim tenants' rights or even adverse possession in some circumstances. But I wasn't their landlord, I protested. They were family. I was helping them. Unfortunately, the law doesn't always recognize those kinds of informal family arrangements, he explained. The fact that they've been living there so long, that they've established it as their residence, that they receive mail there, all of that gives them certain rights. He went on to explain that even if I wanted to evict them, it would be a lengthy and expensive legal process. And since the house was already in foreclosure proceedings due to my missed payments, any legal action would probably be pointless anyway. My advice, he said gently, is to try to work something out with them directly. Maybe they'd be willing to buy you out of your share of the equity, or you could come to some kind of agreement about the property. But I'd already tried reasoning with Carmen. She'd made it clear that as far as she was concerned, I was on my own. The lawyer's consultation cost me $300, money I desperately needed for food and gas. I walked out of his office feeling more hopeless than ever, but then the lawyer said something that would turn out to be crucial. Mrs. Martinez, if you believe there's been any kind of fraud or criminal activity related to this situation, you might want to consider filing a police report. Sometimes criminal cases can move faster than civil ones. Fraud, criminal activity. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough. I had no idea how right he was. 2 weeks after being kicked out, I was sitting in my car outside a homeless shelter, trying to work up the courage to go inside. I'd never imagined I'd be in this position. A 58-year-old woman with a college degree and a steady job, homeless and destitute. But that's when I got a phone call that changed everything. Is this Linda Martinez? The voice asked. Yes, this is Linda. This is James Chin from First National Bank. I'm calling about the mortgage on your property at 1247 Maple Street. My heart sank. This was probably the final foreclosure notice. Mrs. Martinez, there seems to be some confusion about your account. We received a call today from a Carmen Ruiz claiming to be the homeowner and asking about making payment arrangements, but according to our records, you're the sole owner of the property. I sat up straighter. Carmen called you? Yes, ma'am. She was asking about stopping the foreclosure proceedings and wanted to know what it would take to bring the account current. She seemed to think she had the authority to negotiate on the property. What did you tell her? Well, that's why I'm calling you. We explained that only the property owner, which is you, can make arrangements regarding the mortgage. She seemed quite upset about that. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Mr. Chen, what would it take to bring the account current? You're about $18,000 behind on payments, including late fees and legal costs. If you could bring that current, we could halt the foreclosure proceedings. $18,000. I might as well have said $18 million dollars for all the chance I had of coming up with that money. But then Mr. Chen said something interesting. Mrs. Martinez, I have to ask, are you aware that there have been some unusual deposits made to the account over the past few months? Small amounts, but fairly regular. What kind of deposits? It looks like someone has been making partial payments toward the mortgage. Not enough to bring it current, but $200 here, $300 there. The payments are coming from a Carmen Ruiz. Carmen had been making payments on the mortgage. While she was telling me she couldn't afford to contribute anything, while she was kicking me out for my financial problems, she'd been making payments on the house to protect her own interests. That's when I realized Carmen's plan wasn't just to get rid of me. She was planning to take over the house completely. Mr. Chen, I said, I think there might be fraud involved here. Carmen has been lying about her financial situation and may be trying to steal my property. Mrs. Martinez, if you suspect fraud, you should definitely report this to the authorities. We can provide documentation of any suspicious activity on the account. Finally, someone was taking me seriously. I spent the next few days digging into what Carmen had been doing behind my back, and what I discovered was so much worse than I'd imagined. But the real bombshell came when I was going through old bank statements and found something that made me literally gasp out loud. For the past 3 years, Carmen had been receiving direct deposits of $1,200 every month from the Department of Social Services. $1,200 a month. For 3 years, that's over $43,000 that Carmen had been collecting while claiming to be destitute and unemployed. I called the welfare office, pretending to be Carmen and claiming I'd lost my paperwork. Oh, yes, Ms. Ruiz, the caseworker said. You're receiving TANF benefits for 3 dependent children, plus food stamps and housing assistance. Your case shows you're a single mother with no other income or housing support. No other income or housing support. Carmen had been committing welfare fraud for years, collecting benefits for being homeless and destitute while living rent-free in my house and eating food I paid for. But wait, it gets worse. I also discovered something else that made my head spin. Sophia, who was 19 now, had been working full-time at a retail store for over a year, making $15 an hour. Elena, who was 17, had been working part-time as well. Between the two of them, they were bringing in about $2,800 a month. Carmen had been collecting welfare for unemployed poverty, while her family was actually bringing in over $4,000 a month between her secret cleaning job, her welfare fraud, and the girls' jobs. And that's not even counting Miguel's financial aid situation. Remember how I'd been struggling to pay for Miguel's college expenses? I decided to call the financial aid office to see if there were any scholarships or assistance we hadn't applied for. Mr. Ruiz, the financial aid officer said when I called. Oh, yes, he's one of our full scholarship recipients. His tuition, housing, and meal plan are completely covered through our low-income student program. I'm sorry, what? Miguel's education is fully funded through federal grants and need-based scholarships. Has been since his freshman year. The family contribution listed on his FAFSA is zero. Zero family contribution. Miguel's college had been completely free for 4 years, while I'd been emptying my savings accounts and working myself to death paying for expenses that didn't exist. Carmen had been stealing from me, defrauding the government, and lying to her own children about money while collecting income from multiple sources and watching me destroy my health working 3 jobs. The total monthly income Carmen's household was actually receiving? Over $5,000, more than Roberto and I had ever made together. She wasn't poor, she wasn't struggling. She was running a criminal enterprise, and I was her biggest victim. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. While researching Carmen's background, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Carmen had done this before. Through public records and old newspaper articles, I found evidence that Carmen had been involved in similar situations with at least 3 other families over the past 15 years. Before moving in with Roberto and me, she'd lived with an elderly aunt in Arizona, claiming to be the woman's caregiver. When the aunt died, the family discovered that Carmen had been systematically stealing from her, had forged her name on financial documents, and had even tried to claim inheritance rights to the woman's house. Before that, she'd moved in with a widowed neighbor in Texas, claiming she needed temporary help after her divorce. That arrangement lasted 2 years and ended when the woman's adult children discovered that Carmen had been accessing their mother's bank accounts and had stolen over $30,000. And even before that, there was a situation in California where Carmen had convinced an elderly couple to let her and her children live with them in exchange for household help. That ended when the couple's son discovered that Carmen had been selling their belongings and had opened credit cards in their names. Carmen wasn't just an opportunistic thief. She was a professional con artist who specialized in targeting vulnerable people and exploiting their kindness for financial gain. And I'd been her biggest, longest running victim. That's when I decided I wasn't going down without a fight. Carmen might have outmaneuvered me legally and financially, but she'd made some mistakes along the way. Mistakes that were about to cost her everything. First, I reported the government assistance fraud to the appropriate agencies. Carmen had been receiving benefits based on false information about her living situation and expenses, which is a felony. Second, I contacted the IRS about potential tax fraud. For years, Carmen had been filing tax returns as head of household with no mention of the financial support she'd been receiving from me, which meant she'd been underreporting her true income. Third, I filed a police report about the illegal eviction. Regardless of any civil disputes about the property, Carmen had changed the locks and denied me access to my legal residence without going through proper eviction procedures. But most importantly, I started documenting everything. Every canceled check, every bank statement, every receipt. I gathered 12 years' worth of evidence showing exactly how much money I'd spent supporting Carmen and her family. The total was staggering, over $340,000 in direct support, not including the mortgage payments, utilities, and property taxes I'd been covering. I also discovered that Carmen had been forging my signature on several documents, including insurance forms and even some tax papers. This was identity theft and document fraud, serious federal crimes. While I was building my case against Carmen, I was still homeless and struggling. But I'd started staying at a women's shelter and had connected with a social worker named Patricia, who specialized in helping older adults who'd been financially exploited by family members. Linda, Patricia said after reviewing my situation, what happened to you is more common than people realize. Elder financial abuse often comes from family members who take advantage of trust and emotional relationships. But I'm not elderly, I protested. I'm only 58. Financial abuse doesn't just happen to the elderly, Patricia explained. It happens to anyone who's vulnerable, trusting, and has resources that others want to exploit. Patricia suggested I contact a local news reporter who specialized in consumer protection stories. Sometimes public pressure can accomplish what legal action can't, she said. The reporter, Maria Santos, was immediately interested in my story. After verifying the basic facts, she interviewed me for what became a three-part investigative series about family financial exploitation. But Maria went even further than I'd expected. She tracked down the other victims I'd discovered in Carmen's past and interviewed them as well. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to mine. Carmen had used the same tactics, the same lies, the same manipulation on all of us. This woman is a predator, said Helen Martinez, no relation, the widow from Texas whose savings Carmen had stolen. She targets people who are vulnerable, elderly, grieving, or going through financial difficulty, and she destroys their lives. The story aired on a Tuesday evening during the local news. By Wednesday morning, my phone was ringing constantly, with calls from viewers who'd seen the story and wanted to offer support. But more importantly, the story caught the attention of law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Within 24 hours of the story airing, Carmen was facing criminal investigations in 4 different states. The media attention had connected all of her previous victims and crimes, creating a pattern that law enforcement couldn't ignore. You see, during all the months when Carmen was claiming she couldn't find work, she'd actually been employed under the table as a house cleaner for a wealthy family in the suburbs. She'd been making about $800 a week in cash while telling me she was unemployed and couldn't contribute to household expenses. The family who'd been employing her saw the news story and were horrified to realize they'd been participating in tax evasion and potentially helping someone defraud government assistance programs. They immediately fired Carmen and reported the unreported income to the appropriate authorities. But the real momentum came when Miguel called me the day after the story aired. Linda, he said, and this time his voice was shaky with emotion. I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea what my mother was really doing. Miguel had been away at college during most of the recent events and had only heard Carmen's version of the story. He'd believed that I was having financial problems and that his mother was trying to protect the family from my instability. She told me you were having a nervous breakdown after Dad died, Miguel said, crying. She said you were making bad financial decisions and that she was worried about Sophia and Elena's safety. But when Miguel saw the news story with all the documented evidence of how much I'd actually contributed to the family over the years, he realized his mother had been lying to him about everything. Linda, I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. You were like a mother to me, and I treated you terribly. Miguel wasn't the only one. After the story aired, Sophia called me in tears, apologizing for not standing up to her mother. Even Elena, who was still just 17, found a way to call me and tell me how sorry she was. They'd all been told lies about me, and they'd believed their mother without question. But seeing the evidence laid out in the news story had opened their eyes to what had really been happening. Within 2 weeks of the news story airing, Carmen was facing serious legal problems on multiple fronts. The government assistance fraud investigation moved quickly once they had clear evidence of her unreported income and false statements about her living situation. But what really brought her down was the tax evasion. The IRS doesn't mess around when it comes to unreported income, especially when someone has been collecting government benefits based on false financial information. Carmen was charged with multiple felonies: government assistance fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, mail fraud, and elder financial abuse. The charges spanned multiple jurisdictions because of her pattern of targeting victims across state lines. Her court-appointed lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. I had 12 years of canceled checks, bank statements, and receipts. The government had records of her false benefit applications. Her former employers confirmed the unreported income. Multiple victims from different states testified about similar patterns of abuse. Even more damaging, the investigation revealed that Carmen had been running similar scams on other people over the years. The pattern was clear. Carmen was a professional manipulator who targeted vulnerable people, gained their trust, and then systematically exploited them financially until they had nothing left to give. The prosecutor called it one of the most extensive cases of serial financial elder abuse we've ever prosecuted. The hardest part of all this wasn't the legal battles or the financial devastation. It was watching the children I'd helped raise struggle with the truth about their mother. Miguel was the first to reach out and apologize sincerely. Linda, he said when we met for coffee near his college campus, I don't know how to make this right. You sacrificed everything for us, and I turned my back on you when you needed help the most. He told me that he'd confronted his mother about the lies she'd told him, and she'd finally admitted that she'd been manipulating the situation from the beginning. She said she did it to protect us, Miguel said, shaking his head. She said you were getting too attached to us, and that she was worried you'd try to control our lives or take us away from her. Miguel, I never wanted to take you away from your mother, I said. I just wanted to help. I loved you kids like you were my own. I know that now, he said, tears in his eyes, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to see the truth. Sophia's apology was even more heartbreaking. She was 20 now, working full-time, and had started to understand finances and adult responsibilities in a way she hadn't when she was younger. Linda, I realized something terrible, she said, when she called me a few weeks after the news story. All those years when Mom said we couldn't afford things, when she said we were barely getting by, we actually weren't poor at all. You were paying for everything. Sophia had started adding up what their household expenses should have been and comparing it to what Carmen claimed to have for income. The numbers didn't add up unless you factored in all the support I'd been providing. I feel like my whole childhood was a lie, Sophia said. Every time Mom talked about how hard she was working to provide for us, she was actually doing nothing while you worked yourself to death. But the conversation that broke my heart the most was with Elena. She was 18 now, just starting her senior year of high school, and she was furious with her mother. Linda, I want to come live with you, she said when she called me. I can't stand being in that house anymore, knowing what Mom did to you. Sweetheart, I don't have a house anymore, I had to tell her. I'm living in a studio apartment that I can barely afford. I don't care, Elena said. I'll sleep on the couch. I'll get a job to help with expenses. I just can't live with her anymore. It broke my heart to hear this young woman, who I'd loved and supported for 14 years, offering to take care of me when she should have been focused on finishing school and starting her own life. As the legal walls closed in around her, Carmen tried several desperate moves to save herself. First, she attempted to claim that I had been emotionally abusing her and her children, and that everything she'd done was in self-defense. When that didn't work, she tried to argue that all the money I'd spent over the years was actually gifts that I'd given freely, and therefore she didn't owe me anything. Then she tried to claim that she'd been providing valuable services as a housekeeper and childcare provider, and that the value of those services offset any financial support I'd provided. But the most pathetic attempt came when she tried to turn the children against me again by claiming that the news story and legal action were my way of trying to destroy their family out of spite. She's just bitter because Roberto is dead and she's alone, Carmen told Miguel when he confronted her. She's trying to punish us because her life didn't turn out the way she wanted. But the kids weren't buying it anymore. They'd seen too much evidence. heard too many lies exposed. Carmen had lost their trust and respect forever. The most damaging blow to Carmen's defense came when the investigation revealed text messages she'd sent to friends bragging about how she'd found the perfect mark in me and how she was milking the situation for everything it's worth. Meanwhile, the house was still in foreclosure proceedings. Even though Carmen had been making small payments to try to keep it from being sold, she hadn't been able to bring the account current. But here's where things got interesting. The bank's investigation into the property ownership revealed that Carmen's claims of co-ownership were completely fraudulent. Not only had she never made any legitimate claim to the property, but her attempts to establish adverse possession were legally invalid because she'd been living there with my permission as a family member, not as a hostile occupant. More importantly, the bank discovered that Carmen had been intercepting some of the foreclosure notices that should have been delivered to me. She'd been trying to handle the foreclosure proceedings without my knowledge, so she could potentially take over the property herself. This was mail fraud, a federal crime. The bank's lawyers were furious when they realized they'd been dealing with someone who had no legal authority to negotiate on the property. They immediately filed additional charges against Carmen for mail fraud and attempted real estate fraud. But they also made me an offer I hadn't expected. If I could demonstrate that I'd been the victim of financial elder abuse, which the criminal charges against Carmen helped establish, they would work with me on a modified payment plan to save the house. Mrs. Martinez, the bank representative said, we understand that you were supporting multiple people on your income and that you were essentially defrauded by someone you trusted. We're willing to restructure the loan based on your actual ability to pay as a single person. This was the first good news I'd had in months. It took 8 months, but slowly I started rebuilding my life. The bank modified my mortgage to a payment I could actually afford on my income alone. Carmen was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for the fraud charges, and she was ordered to pay restitution, though I knew I'd probably never see that money. Most importantly, I got my house back. The day I walked back into that house with my new keys was one of the most emotional days of my life. It had been empty for months while the legal proceedings played out, and it felt strange and hollow without the sounds of family life I'd grown used to. But it was mine again. After 23 years of marriage, 12 years of supporting Carmen's family, Roberto's death, months of homelessness, and a year of legal battles, I finally had my home back. Miguel, Sophia, and Elena all came to help me move back in and clean up the place. It was awkward at first. We all had so much hurt and betrayal to work through. But gradually, we started to heal our relationships. Linda, Miguel said as we were unpacking boxes in the kitchen, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think you could ever forgive us? Not just me, but Sophia and Elena too? I looked at this young man I'd helped raise, who was now 22 and trying to make his own way in the world despite the chaos his mother had created. Miguel, you were children when all this started, I said. You believed your mother because that's what children do. I don't blame you for that. But I should have questioned things more, Sophia said. I should have realized how much you were doing for us. And I should have stood up to Mom when she kicked you out, Elena added. I was a coward. Listen to me, I said, looking at all three of them. Your mother manipulated all of us. She lied to you about me, and she lied to me about you. We were all victims of her selfishness and greed. But I also had to be honest with them about boundaries. I love all three of you, like you're my own children, I continued, but I can't go back to the way things were before. I can't support anyone else financially, and I can't take responsibility for anyone else's life. I'm 59 years old. I have no retirement savings left, and I need to focus on rebuilding my own future. They all nodded, understanding that everything had changed. Over the next year, we slowly built a new kind of relationship. Miguel graduated from college and got a good job as an engineer. He started paying me back small amounts of money each month, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. Linda, you paid for my education when you couldn't afford it, he said. It's only right that I help you now. Sophia moved out of the house and got her own apartment with a roommate. She was working full-time and taking community college classes in the evenings, working toward a degree in social work. I want to help people who've been taken advantage of, she told me, like what happened to you. Elena finished high school and decided to take a gap year to work and save money for college. She refused to have any contact with Carmen, even when Carmen tried to reach out from prison. She made her choices, Elena said. Now she has to live with the consequences. The most healing thing for all of us was when we started having family dinners again, but this time everyone contributed. Miguel would bring groceries, Sophia would cook, Elena would clean up, and I would provide the house and the love. It was different from before, but in many ways it was healthier. Everyone was contributing according to their ability, and no one was being taken advantage of. Carmen was released from prison after serving 3.5 years of her 5-year sentence. I heard through Miguel that she'd been angry and bitter throughout her incarceration, blaming everyone except herself for her situation. She tried to reestablish contact with her children, but they all refused to see her. She'd destroyed their trust so completely that they wanted nothing to do with her. About a month after her release, I came home from work to find Carmen sitting on my front porch. "Hello, Linda," she said as I got out of my car. "Carmen," I replied, my heart racing. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you, to explain things." "There's nothing to explain," I said, walking toward my front door. Everything that needed to be said was said in court. "Linda, please," Carmen said, standing up. "I made mistakes, but you have to understand that I was just trying to protect my children." I turned to look at her. She looked older, worn down by prison and the consequences of her actions. But there was no remorse in her eyes, only self-pity. Protect them from what, Carmen? From having a stable home? From having someone who loved them unconditionally? From having their college paid for? "You were trying to replace me," Carmen said, her voice getting louder. "You were trying to turn my children against me." "Carmen, I supported your children for 12 years while you did nothing. I never tried to turn them against you. I encouraged them to love and respect you even when you didn't deserve it." "You had no right to play mother to my children." "Then you should have been their mother," I shot back, finally losing my patience. "You should have gotten a job, paid your bills, and taken care of your responsibilities instead of letting someone else do it all while you sat on the couch watching TV." Carmen's face twisted with anger. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You think you're some kind of saint?" "No, Carmen, I think I'm someone who loved your children enough to sacrifice my own financial security to give them a stable home. And I think you're someone who was willing to destroy that love to protect your own selfish interests." Carmen stood there for a moment, and I could see her struggling with whether to continue the confrontation or walk away. "My children will come back to me," she said finally. "When they realize how you've manipulated them against me, they'll come back." Your children are adults now, Carmen. They can see the truth for themselves, and the truth is that you chose selfishness over love every single time. Carmen walked away without another word. I never saw her again. That confrontation with Carmen was actually therapeutic for me. It helped me realize how much I'd healed and how much stronger I'd become through this whole ordeal. I'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in financial abuse and family trauma. Through therapy, I learned that what had happened to me was a form of domestic abuse, not physical, but financial and emotional. Linda, my therapist, Dr. Reynolds, explained, financial abuse is about power and control. Carmen used your love for those children and your generous nature to control your behavior and extract resources from you for years. I'd always blamed myself for being naive or trusting too much, but Dr. Reynolds helped me understand that being loving and generous wasn't a character flaw. Being exploitative and manipulative was. The fact that you were willing to sacrifice for people you loved doesn't make you stupid, she said. It makes you human. Carmen's willingness to exploit that love makes her the problem, not you. I also joined a support group for people who'd experienced financial abuse by family members. I was shocked to learn how common this type of exploitation is, especially targeting older adults or people going through life transitions like grief. The statistics are staggering, the group facilitator told us. Financial abuse by family members affects millions of people, but it's vastly underreported because victims are ashamed or feel like they somehow deserve it. Hearing other people's stories helped me realize that I wasn't alone and that the shame I felt belonged to Carmen, not to me. At 60 years old, I had to completely rebuild my financial life. My retirement savings were gone, my credit was damaged, and I was basically starting over from scratch. But I was determined to create a secure future for myself. I took on additional freelance clients, started a small tax preparation business during tax season, and lived as frugally as possible to rebuild my savings. Miguel, Sophia, and Elena all insisted on helping in small ways. Miguel paid me rent when he stayed in his old room during visits home from his job in another city. Sophia helped with yard work and home maintenance. Elena, who decided to go to community college locally, paid me a small amount for room and board while she lived with me. But the most important thing was that all contributions were voluntary and clearly defined. No one was taking advantage of anyone else. Linda, Elena said one evening as we were making dinner together, I want you to know that living here with you now feels completely different than before. How so, sweetheart? Before, when Mom was here, it always felt like you were doing everything for us and we were just taking. Now it feels like we're all taking care of each other. That observation meant everything to me. We'd finally achieved what a real family should be: mutual support, respect, and care. 2 years after Carmen's release from prison, I received a letter that initially terrified me. Carmen was suing me for grandparents' rights to visit Sophia and Elena, claiming that I was preventing her from having a relationship with her children. Of course, this was completely false. Sophia and Elena were adults who had chosen not to have contact with their mother. I had no power to prevent anything. They were making their own decisions. But the lawsuit was Carmen's attempt to portray herself as a victim and me as a vindictive person who was keeping a mother from her children. The case was thrown out almost immediately when the judge realized that Sophia was 23 and Elena was 20, well beyond the age where anyone could claim grandparents' rights on their behalf. But more importantly, both Sophia and Elena voluntarily testified in court about their decision to cut contact with their mother. Your Honor, Sophia said from the witness stand, my mother is trying to make it seem like Linda is controlling our decisions. But the truth is, we choose not to have contact with our mother because of her actions, not because of anything Linda has done. Elena's testimony was even more pointed. My mother spent years lying to us about Linda while Linda was supporting us financially and emotionally, she told the judge. She kicked Linda out of her own house when Linda couldn't afford to support us anymore. She committed fraud and went to prison. We don't want a relationship with someone who treated the person who raised us so badly. The judge not only dismissed Carmen's case, but ordered her to pay court costs and attorney fees for filing a frivolous lawsuit. It was the final nail in the coffin of Carmen's attempts to manipulate the situation or portray herself as anything other than what she was, a woman who had exploited everyone who'd ever tried to help her. One of the unexpected gifts of rebuilding my life was discovering that it wasn't too late for love. At 61, I met David, a widower who was dealing with his own family drama involving adult children who'd been financially irresponsible. We met in my financial abuse support group. He'd been exploited by his own son, who'd stolen his identity and run up massive debts in his name. David understood the pain of family betrayal in a way that most people couldn't. "Linda," he said after we'd been dating for several months, "I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone again after what my son did to me. But knowing someone else went through something similar and came out stronger gives me hope." Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and very clear boundaries about finances and family. We both maintained our own homes, our own bank accounts, and our own independence. But we also provided each other with emotional support and companionship that neither of us had expected to find again. The kids, Miguel, Sophia, and Elena, were initially protective of me when I started dating, worried that someone might try to take advantage of me again. "Linda, we just want to make sure you're safe," Miguel said when I told them about David. "I appreciate that," I told him, "but I've learned to set boundaries and protect myself. David and I are building something healthy and equal." When they met David and saw how he treated me with respect and kindness, they welcomed him into our extended family circle. Today, 5 years after being kicked out of my own house, my life looks completely different than I ever imagined it would. I'm 63, living in the same house I almost lost, with a small but growing retirement account and a man I love who treats me as an equal partner. Miguel is married now and has a good career. He and his wife visit regularly, and they've made it clear that I'm family to them both. Sophia graduated with her social work degree and works with elderly abuse victims. She says I inspired her career choice. Elena finished college and became a teacher, working with kids who come from difficult family situations. We all learned valuable lessons from the nightmare with Carmen. We learned that family isn't just about blood relationships, it's about mutual respect, support, and love. We learned that enabling someone's bad behavior isn't helping them, it's hurting everyone involved. And we learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. But most importantly, we learned that you can survive betrayal by the people you trust most, and you can build something even better from the ashes of that destruction. I still get angry sometimes when I think about those 12 years I spent supporting Carmen while she contributed nothing. I still feel sad about the retirement savings I'll never get back, the financial security I lost, the months I spent homeless because I trusted the wrong person. But I don't regret loving those children or trying to help a woman I thought was family. The problem was never my generosity or my love. The problem was Carmen's willingness to exploit those qualities. And in the end, love won. The children I helped raise became good, decent adults who learned from their mother's mistakes. They know the difference between accepting help when you need it and exploiting someone who cares about you. If you're listening to this story, I want you to understand something important. Financial abuse by family members is more common than you think, and it can happen to anyone. It usually starts small and builds gradually. Someone needs help with rent just this once. Someone can't find work right now, but they're trying. Someone's children need stability, and you're in a position to provide it. The red flags I missed were all there. Carmen's constant excuses for not contributing, her sense of entitlement to my support, her anger when I tried to set boundaries, and her willingness to let me work myself to exhaustion while she did nothing. But the biggest red flag was how quickly I went from being family to being a stranger the moment I couldn't provide financial support anymore. Real family doesn't abandon you when you're struggling. Real family doesn't exploit your generosity or take advantage of your love. Real family contributes according to their ability and supports each other through difficult times. If you're in a situation where you're supporting adult family members who could be supporting themselves, ask yourself these questions. Are they actively working to improve their situation, or are they comfortable letting you handle everything? Do they contribute what they can, or do they always have excuses? Do they treat you with respect and gratitude, or do they act entitled to your support? And most importantly, what would happen if you stopped providing financial support? Would they work with you to find solutions, or would they abandon you and blame you for their problems? Those answers will tell you everything you need to know about whether you're helping family or enabling exploitation. These days, I wake up every morning grateful for the life I've rebuilt. It's smaller than the life I had before, simpler in many ways, but it's mine. No one is taking advantage of me, no one is lying to me, and no one sees me as just a source of money. David and I got married last year in a small ceremony with just the kids and a few close friends. The kids are all doing well in their own lives and visit regularly. My tax preparation business is thriving, and I'm slowly rebuilding my retirement savings. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years I spent supporting Carmen and her children. The answer is complicated. I regret supporting Carmen, who never deserved it and who exploited my kindness for over a decade. But I don't regret loving Miguel, Sophia, and Elena. I don't regret giving them stability during their childhood. I don't regret being there for them when their own mother wouldn't step up. The love I gave those children was real, and it made a difference in their lives. The fact that their mother was willing to exploit that love doesn't diminish its value. Carmen thought she was so clever, manipulating me for years and then discarding me when I was no longer useful. But in the end, she lost everything that mattered: her children's respect, her freedom, her reputation, and any chance at redemption. Meanwhile, I gained something much more valuable: the knowledge that I can survive anything, the wisdom to set healthy boundaries, and a chosen family built on mutual respect and genuine care. Carmen said I wasn't family because Roberto was dead, but she was wrong about that, just like she was wrong about everything else. The family I have now, Miguel, Sophia, Elena, David, and the friends I've made through support groups and rebuilding my life, that family is stronger than any blood relationship because it's based on choice, respect, and real love. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up giving you the greatest gifts. Carmen's betrayal forced me to find strength I didn't know I had, to rebuild my life on my own terms, and to understand the difference between love and exploitation.